Hi everyone, welcome to Krista's Quilting Services. Today's video is going to walk you through preparing the batting, backing, and quilt top from the start to the end. You can see the pieces behind me that are ready to be done. And we will start with the backing. We'll go over what the quilting design will be for the top, attaching it to the long arm, loading, all of that good stuff. I have everything ready to go for the backing. I'm going to show you my method when I'm only looking for 2 square ends on a backing piece. These 2 ends are the ones that will load to the front rail and to the back rail. They are pinned on, and for your backing to be rolled up evenly without any extra fabric like that could possibly bunch up, they need to be squared up. The parts that are on the sides, this part is fine if it's not squared up. It just rolls, it just unrolls. Everything is already centered, and I'll walk you through how I find that center line and how I check to make sure that what I'm going to be attaching to the back and the front rails are ready, they're even. So what I do is I take the backing fabric, and in this case it happens to be bed sheet, and I'm going to treat the already stitched line here at the top as being even. The rest of my quilt is going to match up to this part. So I fold it in half, make sure these ends here are good. Check to make sure that it's pretty well, more or less, it's even all the way through. I drape it over top of one of the rails. Smooth that out, make sure there's no wrinkles or folds, and I take one of my clips and I will secure this down. And then when I pull this tight, this line right here, the folded line, is going to be straight. So I'm going to adjust whatever I need to on the rest of my side over here, so that way everything is smooth down the front. And this is how I'm going to know if I need to adjust anything on this back. Now you can see here that this part, oh, maybe you can't see, but this part is a little bit wider. The cut is just a little uneven all the way along the edge here. And then it gets a little bit wider on the front, the back is a little bit narrower. But this is fine. This part is not being attached to the frame in any way, and so it doesn't, it doesn't get finished with the squaring process. But this end does, and it is cut a little unevenly. There are parts here that aren't quite lined up, and so all I'm going to do is take this, I'm going to fold it in half one more time, just so it's narrow enough that I can cut it with my mat and on the table. Use my ruler to line it up, make one cut with my rotary cutter, and this side here is going to be even. Okay, I have the backing over at my cutting table. It has already been folded in half again. When I go to cut this, I like to make sure that the bottom folded line is at the bottom of my mat. I'm going to have one more fold line here at the top, and basically the idea with these folds is they're going to follow kind of like that grain of fabric as we're folding, shaking things out. The fold is just naturally should be falling into a straight line. So when I go to use my ruler to match up and decide how much fabric I'm going to cut off here, where my ruler lines up with the top and with the bottom, I should have an even edge on both sides lining up with those. And then the other thing you want to take into consideration, so I'm going to switch this around so that the ruler is on the bulk of the fabric instead of just on that little bit of the edge here. And I'm gonna turn that over so you can see a little more. So making sure that everything is smoothed out. And you want to check both the top and the back to make sure that when you are trimming off some of the excess, that you are going to the smallest, or the point that's the most into the quilt, which is actually pretty far. It's right here. So I'm going to have to take off a good couple of inches. And since I always find that my long rulers tend to slide on me, I have borrowed my husband's weights that he just doesn't use this size of weight anymore. So for me, it is perfect. I just pop it there on the top. It holds the ruler in place so it doesn't slide while I'm going down, and I'm taking the time here to match up my ruler marking. I pick a line so it's even on the bottom, and I'm checking to see if it's how it's doing on the top. So this is off. It's not going to be enough of a difference at this point that it will affect the pinning this end to the long arm. Oh, put my ruler on. I'm good at that side, that's, yeah. There's only about 1/8 of an inch wobble on this. Okay. And this part here, this is what wasn't quite even. And that can be set aside. Okay, I have the quilt top sitting on my work table now. I'm going to go over a little bit how I decided what I was going to do with this one. So I'm going to just gonna turn this camera over. I've got this quilt top here, has sewing themed fabric in it, and these are all supposed to be spools of thread. And I didn't erase this before starting this video, so I'm just gonna erase this now. But I like to have some plastic and tape it down. It helps, and a whiteboard marker. Great for trialing designs. This particular piece of plastic was page protector. I opened it up so I had more space to draw. And just a paper towel to wipe it all off. So I knew I wanted to do some kind of an outline design, and I wanted to do something that was different in the borders. Some very basic custom quilting. And to start it off, I needed to pick a point. I knew I wanted to have some thread coming through here in the center, and I wanted to outline this portion of the spool, so that way it looks like those older wooden older wooden spools that have these like really big, thick top and bottoms. So I picked one of my points to start here. Now you can start from here, 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 or here. It does not matter. Whichever way you start, though, you are going to track up into the spool, the top, come around and down, and come back across, and that's going to create the outer portion of that spool. And then you can wind back and forth with some stitching to give that thread wrapped around the spool look. And then you'll continue to trace along to finish outlining your spool here. Then I wanted it to look like thread was coming off the spool. And so I did a very like long meander, like a meander with the occasional loop. So meander, meander, little loop, meander, meander, loop, kind of all around just to help fill up some of that space. I don't want this to be a very dense quilting, so these meanders are going to be long and loopy. Just enough to fill in the space. And this will allow me to fill in like all of the space between between each spool without having to break my thread. It allows for it to move over all of the sashing, and the whole thing kind of creates this one continuous look. So then at this point, I'm going to kind of come up through here, and with these piano key borders, they're just wide enough to put about 3 different elements in there. And I thought it'd be fun to have the thread look like somebody may be been practicing their stitching designs, and the whole side, the borders are going to be like this collection of essentially different border elements that a person can do. And so here it looks like kind of a little bit flower-like. So I'm going to come into here, make a loop, do some petals for a flower, come back out, another one, make another flower, and a third one, and I got space for that. And then because this is the edge of the quilt, what I'll do is come out a little bit onto the batting to the side, and then I'm going to come back in for the next part of my quilt. And I've got some tape here, so I can't quite start as close to the edge as I'd like. But let's say I want to put in something like this. And as long as you kind of plan it well enough, try not to have meander maybe coming in too close to this part down the side, because you won't be able to tell if you're going to end at the top or the bottom. And so you want to be able to have some more like meander that you can kind of loop through around, and then you might start into the next part, and you might choose something like to come in, and you might decide to put in a heart. And with these ones, I kind of like to do a little wavy line to the next part point, and connect it down, and it lets me have my hearts evenly spaced. I'm not struggling to try and get a straight line. And then I can come down around the edge of the quilt for the next part, which might be, say, some stars. And I might do the same thing to kind of help them travel along. And oh, that didn't work. You might want to practice your stars and starting in from different directions. Usually I start this way, but it's not blending out the best in my drawing to traveling along this side. And that's okay. You'll figure it out as you go. And then maybe over here I might do some circles with an extra loop on the inside, and I'm taking the buttons into consideration here to help with that particular look. And so that's just how I will travel up and down those borders, and just be as creative as you'd like in them. There's all kinds of designs that you can try practicing. Okay, so we are ready to start loading the backing onto the frame. If your backing is a print, there's a front and a back. The front, or the outside part that you want to see, is going to be facing down, so it's going to look like it's going backwards onto the frame, compared to like what you're used to putting right sides together. We are going to build up from the bottom. So what you do, now all my leader cloths here have these center points marked, and I'm not sure that you can see the red pen here, but it's marked on this one and it's marked on the other one. And part of preparing the backing is marking the center point on both the top and the bottom of the quilt as well. And that center point that I've got marked here in purple will match up with the marking on my leader cloth. That is how I will know that I'm pinning this to my leaders correctly. I like to start with the back leader first, and it lets me, once it's all pinned up, I can roll everything up onto the back, so that way there's not a whole lot left while I'm attaching to the front, and it lets me know right away if something is just a little bit out. So I'm just going to drape this across, pull this out a little bit on the front. This is just a bed sheet that's being used for the back of this particular quilt. This is a donation quilt, and bed sheets are really good cheap way to have a sturdy backing on them. Okay, so now that I'm ready to start, I guess, pinning it, before I pin, I actually use these clips, and I clip my center point first, and I just kind of smooth everything out. It holds, I find it holds the fabric in place for me. I don't have to worry about it falling off the rail as I do this. And when I'm pinning, it helps make sure things aren't shifting on me in ways that I don't want them to shift. This last one over here. Do the other side the same way. I don't put too many on. I leave, like, I don't know, maybe a little more than a hand span away. I don't go too far, otherwise I find that it does shift, and sometimes the fabric wants to pull below the leader and I have to readjust a little bit more as I go along. But it is a nice tool to help line it all up. Okay, so those are all clipped on. And for pinning, I just use, I don't know, I have a whole bunch of these in flathead pins. The flatheads all have different designs on them. If I'm doing a large quilt like a queen, I will almost use the entire box. So I'll just use a different style for the other side. I kind of like my pins to all be the same. Per bar. It's just much faster when I'm undoing everything at the end. I can remove these really fast. So on the back of my leader cloth, show you a little bit closer over here, there are all these little dotted lines. They are for pinning along, kind of like a sewing line, and I will put my pin in through one and try and get it to come out the other. Now I do start from the center, and then I work my way one side and I work my way the other side. I have learned to do this with either my left hand or my right hand doing the bulk of the pinning. It takes a little bit of practice. I am right-handed, so if I'm sticking the pin in with my left hand, it doesn't go quite as quick. And then I line up my pins basically head to heel, and with like a slight overlap. So the flathead covers just the edge of where the other pin came out, or like kind of comes back out this way. So it does help prevent just a little bit of like snaking or accidental bumping up against it while I'm doing this. I have poked myself a few times, and when I have, it's been in this part right here where I'm pushing the pin back up through the fabric, and my thumb has just gotten in the way, and or if it was just a little bit stiff and didn't want to poke through. And then suddenly it does, you end up with a giant hole in your finger. So I have learned exactly where I need to place my thumb so it's out of the way, and I haven't poked myself since doing the first couple of quilts. There's, yeah, like maybe a total of 3 times or so. So anyway, I'm just going to keep pinning along here. There we go. The last one is in. And we will move on to the next step. I'm going to move where the camera is so that way you can see this next part better. So the back is all pinned on. I am going to roll that up here right away, but before I did, I just draped and kind of smoothed this over the front rail. So my handle here turns a little bit loud, so kind of bear with me. So my reason for having this drag out over the front is that it helps me see right away if there's going to be any spots that want to kind of like pucker in. I can smooth them out. And anytime that fabric drags over another piece of fabric, it kind of creates a little bit of tension. So it's going to help with letting this piece wind up over the back rail without being too tight and certainly not too loose. This part, I should say, it doesn't have to be rolled onto the backing. Like you're not looking for perfection. You're just looking for it to be generally even, a little like snug. And when we're done pinning this to the front and we kind of unroll it back onto the front, that is the point where we're going to be checking to make sure that everything is like really smoothed out well. And the reason that I like to make sure that I pin from the center and I go to one side and then the next is that when I do come here to smooth out one of the batting rails, I know approximately where the center is, and if I'm running my hand along it, I'm not accidentally going to end up with the pin sticking up and catching that through the fabric. At this point, you want to stop with just a little bit of fabric over your rail. I've got maybe kind of a hand's width. You're going to want some room to be able to work with it as you're pinning the top now, or you're backing now onto this top rail. Okay, I am ready to start pinning or clipping first. I don't have a great spot to set anything down, so when it comes to these clips, usually I'm hoping I'm wearing a sweater or shirt, anything that's got some pockets in it makes it a little bit easier, and I just put a handful of them into my pocket, and then I am able to reach in and grab as I go. So same process as before. I look for my middle marking that I made already on my fabric, and I line that up to the center marking of my cloth leader, and I put a clip there, and then I just keep working my way down. Now when I'm doing the front, the thing that is particularly great about the clips is it lets me right away see if something has shifted and is way off base. I really haven't had that happen where I've had to unroll and redo the back. I've had my backing fabric just be weird, and then a quilt that was needed to be done, I didn't have enough time to really figure what was going on, nor the time to deal with that frustration, and so I ended up just switching out to a different backing for that quilt. And I haven't yet tried to figure out if it was something that I did when I was loading it onto the frame, or if it was something wrong with the backing itself. And one day I will get to that, but I'm not quite there yet. And just a few more clips to come over to the other side. And always, everything I do is from the center out. And oh yeah, on the floor, just you can kind of see it. I'm not sure if you've caught glimpses of it in some of the other parts of the videos. I have some interlocking foam mats that I picked up from Walmart, and I've got them stacked 3 high. And for this particular project, they're sitting about 4 wide. I think it's about all I can fit in this space anyway. There is a telepost that is in the way, so it can't go further. But it certainly saves, excuse me, my back. It definitely helps with like fatigue and like backache and knees and all that. When you're standing and quilting, it can get sometimes a little bit hurt on the body. I'm just gonna roll this quilt a little bit more forward. Pull that one up on the back a bit. Smooth things out, see how I did. And here it is. It's looking pretty good. It's not obviously rolled up tight, and I don't have any of the side tension clamps on here, so there's going to be a couple of spots towards the edges that look perhaps just a little bit loose, and some of that can just be how it rolls up onto the back bar at this point. When everything gets transferred over to the front, I go pretty slow, and I make sure that there's a lot of tension between both bars, and I'm able to smooth out all of that stuff so it's rolling onto this front bar perfectly. So the next step is to pin everything to the front, and when that is done, then I will come back for the next part. All right, the rest of the backing is pinned onto the belly bar. So now I'm going to just start rolling everything back onto this bar. First, and just enough to create a little bit of tension. It's kind of that first roll, smooth everything out. At this point, I haven't loosened off the ratchet for the back rail yet. And as I quilt this one, it looks like there's a little bit of like extra fabric just here at the end. And often anyway, the ends are a little bit kind of droopy. And that's what the side clamps are for. They help keep the tension up where you want it. But I do keep an eye on that as I'm rolling through everything. That part looks good. Yeah, that looks good. Okay, so when you're bringing a quilt to me in the backing, you do want to make sure that as best as you can that you have squared off your quilt back, and that it's pressed well. If there are lots of wrinkles and anything like that, then I'm going to have to press that out before I can load it. Otherwise, it's just not going to load onto the frame as well as it possibly could. And this particular bed sheet did just fine. I didn't need to press out anything extra, but I did need to square off that one side. Okay, so I have loosened off my back rail now, and I'm just going to hold on to it, the handle, or like the rolling wheel, while I switch from, or transfer the fabric from the top to the bottom rail. And it just helps keep that tension as I go. I know if I'm going to have right away any big wrinkles forming. And eventually at some point you start to, and so then I just come along and just smooth them out, pull along wherever I need to. And this is why you want, when you're pinning, to make sure that you're going from the center out. Otherwise you're going to be running your hand into the pins. You don't want that. There we go. And I like to make sure that when I do get to the end where it's on the take-up bar, that I have just a little bit of, you can see the pins and you can see the cloth leader. And that's just because my machine, when it's all the way pushed to the back, I can't stitch quite that close, so I need this little bit of gap here to be able to just start my quilt and not have to worry about running into the bar and ending up with a flat part in the design. That is how I do my backing. Okay, the next part is loading up the batting and the backing. Now I already mostly have the batting laid out here. I do take care to be sure I'm loading it the right direction to match the length or the width of how I've loaded your backing. In this particular quilt, I have loaded longwise, so top and bottom, and then side to side. Doing it this way usually means top and lengthwise, longer than the width. It could be one or two fewer times that I have to advance the quilt, and that can save me anywhere from, on the number of times that I advance, it takes about 15 minutes to do each one. If I've saved myself 2 advances, that's half an hour of time and kind of playing around. So this part, the batting, I make sure to kind of center that out over top. In this case, my batting is pretty much, in some spots, longer than my backing. And I've started just a little high on this, so I am going to kind of tug this down just a little bit. I like to load everything ultimately is like tight to my line here as I can. I don't like to overlap it because then I can't see where my leaders begin and end. And what this allows for then, when it comes time to trim your quilt, it allows for the most usable space. You're always going to have extra, and it allows for you to have some usable amount of batting, backing at the bottom, or even potentially from the sides as well, by starting as close to this line as I can. So one side will be very narrow, there won't be a whole lot to trim off, but then the other side, depending on how much extra I have, could just be from a couple of inches to, like, I've even had sometimes 6 or 7 inches, depending on the width of your fabric and the sizing of your batting. Sometimes more, sometimes it's less, but it's great to use in some of those extra projects. Keep it for a table runner if you've got wide enough. So now that is centered, I am then going to lay the quilt top down, making sure that it is centered as well. And I tend to kind of eyeball this. I do keep it pulled back a little bit from here. I like to baste the batting before I baste the quilt top down. I find that it's a little more secure. A little less movement when I go to add on the quilt top. And I will line that up there. So when I line up your quilt top, to make sure that it is all even, I look for kind of I follow a sashing line usually, or a block line. Some point where I can gauge where that is falling on the rail. And then I just smooth everything out. I do sometimes take a ruler just to help with that smoothing process, get it really stuck down onto the batting. This is the point where if there's any issues, particularly with your border, that I'm going to find if there's a little bit of fullness. There is a tiny bit in this, not much, enough that it'll incorporate in easily when I'm quilting this out, but sometimes there's going to be too much fullness, and if that were the case, then the borders need to come off and be cut to size and then reattached. In that case, I will be getting in touch with you as a client to find out how you would like to do that, if you would like to try to take that back home and do that, or if you want me to attempt that. And we'll talk about those options. So at this point though, the next step is to start basting everything down. Right, my machine is threaded, the bobbins are wound, and I have double checked everything with the quilt top to make sure it is also ready to go. We are ready to baste everything down, and I like to baste my batting down first. Usually that I will come through a top to a bottom, and then I will baste back up with the quilt top. That way I'm not accidentally pulling anything down. It's much more likely to want to naturally sag this way, so by making sure that I stitch my quilt up this way with the basting, it will stay in line. I'm not going to accidentally warp it. So I'll do the one side first. I will then baste across on the batting to the other side, go down the batting, come back up this side on the quilt top, and then come back around from that end to this end on the quilt top as well. Okay, the other cool thing about basting the sides as I go is I know exactly how far I can quilt to without running out of room. I always try to make sure I stop above that for sure. Most of my design stops a couple inches above that. If I were to bump into the bar, or I guess in this end the bar at the back of my machine, I'm going to end up with some straight lines, or my design might not extend quite where I intended it to go. And at that point, either I need to break thread, pull some stuff out, or I just keep going. And if your top has a running stitch along the edge, I will try to make sure that I am basting within the lines of the running stitch, so you're not losing any extra when you're trimming your quilt at the end. as you can see, the base stitch is a fairly large one. I have different stitch length options from small, medium, and large, and this one happens to be the small. So I will finish basting this, and then we will come back for the next part. Before I was ready to do this part, I went through the different things I was going to want to put on the piano keyboarders, made a list of them, and then made a sort of a chart, condensed chart that I'm able to follow through, and it'll give these piano keyboarders some consistency with what things I'm putting in there. These big ones here, I'm going to do a kind of a ribbon meander, pulling that just from, there's a tape measure in here that sort of is kind of a ribbony look. So I'm gonna put that in all the big ones, but then the small ones are going to be kind of some combinations of different hearts, stars, flowers, loops and leaves, swirls, twirls. And so the green ones are more of my like objects. These are more, I don't know, like kind of line patterns as opposed to an object. And so there are, so basically I'll kind of go down this way, and then move on to object number 2, line pattern number 2. So move on to object number 3, it'll alternate back to the first of kind of the line patterns. So that way it gives a lot of variety. It won't look like there's a whole lot of, it'll look a little bit more random, but a planned random look. And I won't have to, when I come to the next piano keyboarder, decide what I'm going to put inside of it. So I am all ready to stitch my first part, and sometimes with things like kind of this meander ribbon, there's not really like I don't have a real plan on how I'm going to put in there. So before I start stitching, I like to often kind of trace through with my finger to give an idea of how I might want to place that first. Lets me know where I'm going to look, and then when I go to come back and trace it, I'm going to be able, I'll be starting and ending here. Now, with this particular quilt being kind of a comfort quilt, I don't want a whole lot of dense stitching in here. So the meander that I put in is fairly large, and when I do come back and cross over that line again to turn it into the ribbon, it's going to tighten it up a little bit more too. And then now that I'm kind of at that one spot, I am going to kind of clip this down a little bit, just so that the 2 thread ends here are the same. And then I do bury the ends as I go, instead of cutting them close to the fabric. That way we don't have to worry about any of the stitching suddenly coming undone. Sometimes I don't always do these until closer to the end, and sometimes I'll do it from behind the long arm frame. I do like to make sure when I'm burying them, I don't accidentally get the needle down through the backing layer, and having my hand underneath as a support just lets me get a feel for if the needle's accidentally looped through or not. But let's see if I can get this to go through with a leaf threader. Just pull that through. Give it a little bit of a tug. I do pull it fairly taut So that way when I clip it, I'm just a tiny bit away from the fabric. Don't want to accidentally make that fabric. But because I've pulled it and put a little tension, as soon as it's cut, it'll kind of spring back inside and underneath. And now that thread is buried, and these ends over here are not going to come undone. So I'm going to finish quilting up the rest of this. I have finished quilting and I'm ready to show you the next parts. It is time to unroll everything, unpin it, and take it off the frame. I like to do this bar first, kind of the opposite order that I put it on, and then I like to do this portion at the end. So I'm going to release the ratchet so I can expose my pins, and part of the reason for this is because it creates a table where I can keep my pin box. I don't have that, or I already have a table on the back side to put my pin box on, and so that just, it makes it a lot easier for me. And I just quickly pull them out one at a time, hold as many as I can in my hand, and drop them in. Move that pin box further to the other side. This doesn't always come on like pulled out. Sometimes the fabric and just how it was pinned and on the bar, it could sometimes hold it for quite a while. So because it did already let go on the one side, I will make sure to grab that pin box out of there before I drop the last pins. There we go. Get that a cover so it doesn't fall apart. And the next part, just unrolling the back, and the way it looks as it unrolls is totally my favorite part. And let's see if I can change that camera angle. That might work. Release the ratchet over here, and it just sort of, I love how it just drapes over onto the table at the end. And then at this point, need to let this off just a little more. Then I just kind of pull it back up and around and take out the rest of my pins from this side and just dropping them onto the backing here. Let's see. Reach for that box. As I can't quite haul out as many at a time here, just because my other hand is busy holding the leader and the quilt in place. And I get a peek at the back, and it is so cool. I love how this turned out. You can see kind of the outlines from the spools of thread, and without the piecing on the front distracting from the stitching, it really looks like the thread is coming off the spools. So as soon as I'm done with this, I'll turn the quilt around so that way you can see what the back looks like. And oh, I'm just so excited to show this off for anybody who might be able to see. Okay, just about done. Just 4 left. And that's detached. I'm gonna roll up my beater again here so it is out of the way. Come back around. Drape this kind of back over the frame. And I might need to, I think I'm going to take the camera off. So how cool is that? You can see some of these turned out really nicely with those thread spools, and it just, yeah, it looks like you can see the thread coming off of it, moving around, stitching just sort of hanging out, and then over to the sides where the piano key borders are, you can see it's almost like a sampler quilt or sampler stitching all the way down. Okay, let's put that up again. Okay, so the this quilt, the next thing that I would do, I won't be doing with this one in particular since it's been requested that I return it as is. You have all this extra batting and this backing that is aside from your quilt piece in here, that top. And if for, you know, whatever reason you decided that you would prefer for me to trim all of that off, so trimming is, I would just cut it down. So all you get, the batting and the extra batting and backing are cut off and they match the front of your quilt. So you would get it back looking like this. So nothing finished on the edges, just cut off with a rotary blade to remove that part. And if you want your extra backing and batting back, let me know. Or if you don't want it, let me know that too. I do use some of the wider strips of batting and backing for like for warm-up practice. Then the next option, if I were finishing your quilt completely, you would have provided me with prepared binding. If that was not something you wanted to do either, you would then provide me with the extra fabric and I could prepare that binding and put it on. And those come at additional costs depending on the size of the quilt. And that is it. That is a quilt start to finish. I hope you found this video to be informative and you're able to kind of have an idea of what to expect as you either if you're going to just starting into long arming your own works, or if you're looking to have me or somebody else long arm. There are a few things that we all do differently. Some do just cut off and trim unless you don't want them to. We all do things just a little bit differently, and this video outlines some of those particular details that I do. If you've had an experience of something different with somebody else and you are curious about that, feel free to get in touch with me and ask. And I'll let you know, if that's something I can accommodate or why I may or may not choose to do something. So, all right, have a wonderful day or morning or night, whatever time you happen to be watching this. All right, thanks everyone. Thanks for watching.